Hey, y'all, welcome back to Mr. Global's channel. I'm Matt Randolph, globally recognized oil and gas expert, news, politics, energy. In this clip, we're going to talk about Americans' obsession with gas prices, specifically cheap gas. Check this out.
We have got to tap into our fossil fuel and look, just driving down the cost of fuel to gas up your car, okay, back where it used to be at $1.80 a gallon. That is a huge economic shot in the arm for the consumer.
Yes, we're talking about Americans' obsession with cheap gas. And sometimes I wonder, because it would have been over 20 years ago, gasoline was under $1.80 a gallon. And keep in mind, when we talk about gas prices, we talk about it on a national average, not in your specific area. But it seems like gas is the only thing that American consumers don't believe should ever go up. If you go back 20 years ago to the summer of 2005, gas was over $2.90 a gallon. So pretty close to where it is now. But what about the cost of everything else that has risen significantly higher than the cost of gas? It seems like Americans are scratching for pennies at the gas pump while just getting gouged for thousands of dollars elsewhere. And we constantly hear about gas. Now, the data says that the cost of living has increased by 63% in the last 20 years. I honestly find that hard to believe. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But when you consider the fact that the cost of housing is up over 100% in the last 20 years, the cost of food is up 70%, the cost of healthcare is up over 100 to 200%. College tuition is up 150%. Childcare, 150%. The cost of all of these things is significantly higher than the rise in cost of gasoline. And they're much larger financial outlays. And some of those statistics I don't quite agree with either. For instance, they say the average cost of a health insurance premium is now $350, and it was like $200 back then. Our health insurance is like $2,000 a month. I don't know anyone paying $350 a month for health insurance. That doesn't mean they're not out there. I'm just saying I'm not so sure about some of these statistics. They say, the average household now spends $500 a month on groceries. I'd like to see those households. We have kids, so, $500, maybe 7 to 10 days, maybe certainly not in a month. Now, with all that being said, our country was built and planned for people to drive. And we have a lot of people in this country that drive a lot of miles. When you talk about people that live in the suburbs and, they built these communities 20 miles, 30 miles outside of the commerce centers of big metropolitan areas, these people easily drive 100 miles a day. So I totally understand the sensitivity to gas prices. But relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the world, the United States, ranks in the top third of lowest gas prices in the world. There are obviously countries who have extremely cheap gas, and their governments basically pay for it and subsidize well over 95% of it. And we actually subsidize a lot of the gas here, and people don't see that or understand that, but it's true. 68% of all the renewable energy in the United States is actually ethanol, a heavily subsidized fuel additive, which is supposed to drive down gas prices. But don't be mistaken. We pay for that through our tax dollars. The fact of the matter is, if the cost of shelter and insurance and food and those other critical items that Americans spend money on every month, if they had risen at the same rate as the cost of gasoline, the cost of living would be pretty sweet right now. Because everything would be cheaper. Everything would be significantly cheaper, but we focus on gas prices. And I really believe this has a lot to do with wages. in the United States. And I say that fully knowing and fully understanding that I know people who make a very nice living, who, they make well into six figures, $200,000-$300,000, right, households, complaining about gas prices when there's people out there still making that $7.25 that have to buy the same gas you do. And we've been told for decades that we can't raise wages because it'll cause inflation. We experience the inflation anyway. That is a thing that is going to happen regardless of whether we raise wages or not. Period. But the larger point is, until we address the wage problem in this country, we can continue to try to drive down the cost of critical items that we need. That seems to be the way Americans want to fight this. It's just by continually trying to make things cheaper. Every politician promises to make things cheaper for you. It seems to be the predominant narrative. There's not enough discussion about how people can make more money to afford to live. That's probably because the corporations own the politicians and they're the ones that pay the wages. But isn't that really what we need to be focusing on? How is it that in 2025, people are working for $7.25 an hour? I understand, people don't have a choice. Why are we forcing people to do this? How do they survive? How does someone making $10 or $15 an hour survive? I guess it feels good to certain people to say that we live in the richest country in the world, and people love to say that, and for some reason it makes them feel good. But that doesn't identify or signify who holds all that money, who actually has that money, because it's not the vast, vast, vast majority of the people that live in this country. It's the select few that actually hold all of that wealth. So it really doesn't matter if we live in the richest country in the world, if there's like 1,000 people that own it all. You know what I mean? Like, what difference does it make? The people that live in this country, and I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but they're becoming like these corporate slaves. They have to make a certain amount of money just to survive, and that is all they're getting, just enough to survive, and they're having to work themselves to death to do that. People are literally having to work until they die, and that is not the American dream. It never was the American dream, and it has nothing to do with the American dream, and people are having to do that so billionaires can have bigger boats, bigger planes, bigger jets, and take more vacations. And until we get the dark money and the big money out of our politics, out of Congress, especially out of the White House, that's never going to change. And it's going to be up to the people to make that change. The people in Washington, D.C. aren't just going to decide to fix this country themselves because they can. They're getting paid not to. The people of this country have to fix it. You're in a hole and you have a shovel and you're trying to dig your way out by making the hole deeper. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. We need to elect good people in Washington, D.C., regardless of the party, okay? We need to elect good people and not people who are bought by the corporations. Oh, man. I get so frustrated talking about this stuff. Look, I'm going to end that clip right there. Thank you all so much for subscribing and following my channel. Please like and comment and share any way you can. Thank you so much.